Um, so I would just love to hear about your experience living in the US and speaking Russian. And I know your kids enrolled at a Russian school, so how that was since 2022, you've seen shifts in the Russian community if you interact
Sure.
with them.
So some of the things I have a slightly different angle because I'm a Russian speaking um, individual who was born and raised in the periphery of the Russian Empire because I grew up in Uzbekistan.
Okay.
I don't speak Uzbek. I was part of the people who spoke Russian and were part of the Russian culture who lived in the periphery. Well, call it I don't know, colonies now, but it was part of Soviet Union back then. So I think that, so my experience is certainly is from that direction.
Mm.
And I think that so I came just very briefly, I was 14 years old when I immigrated from Soviet Union to the US, to New York City at the time when Soviet Union fell apart. And then partially, I wanted to tell you, just to take it back historically, I mean, there was a lot of euphoria and good feeling and good hope because the Cold War was done, we thought. And there was a lot of sort of feeling of being welcomed and sort of making a life in a place where you left this place that was going to change and you left for a place that was manipulative and evil and stuck. It's been 35 years and a lot has changed. I feel a lot, unfortunately, has changed for the worse. I feel that as someone who came in the 90s, people had a lot of curiosity and fascination coming out of the empire and sort of changing to the democratic ways. And then it gradually faded to being sort of this stagnation, and Russia went through a lot of horrible, lawlessness in the 90s. It's like if it didn't have an autocrat, then everything was up for grabs. So their interest in Russia, I think, kind of faded. If in, people like, oh, whatever well, I was from Uzbekistan, but now you speak Russian. And then, of course, the acuity of it has come back because of, ironically, the misbehavior and the evilness of the war that in Ukraine. And it has shaped people in many different ways, but I also think it shifted attention away for us who came from the countries where a lot of spoke Russian but were not in Russia, like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. It was a humbling experience because a lot of these countries that used to be dominated by Russia had an opportunity to rise on their own, but at the same time embrace people like me who still speak Russian. I don't speak Uzbek. I'm not part of the culture. I was just back there for the first time in 35 years a
Wow.
few months ago, and I was actually very pleased how much people spoke Russian. And partially, I know this is not your exact question, but partially, there are a lot of Russians who fled Russia. And those who had maybe money to go west went west, and those who didn't went east. And people have moved to Uzbekistan. And because they were welcomed economically, they kind of boosted, but they were welcomed. There was no hatred as much for people who fled the regime, who didn't agree with what Russia was doing, or for economical reasons, that have moved to the periphery. So that's in a kind of Russian speaking people are a very complicated group because not all of them are Russians. I have a lot of friends who are Russian speaking from Ukraine. And that's a very, people now speak Ukrainian, but they speak Russian just as well. I work with a woman who's a Ukrainian psychologist. She speaks Ukrainian, she speaks fluent Russian. Russian is actually closer to her as a language. And people don't want to speak Russian because it's a signifier of oppression, but they also speak Russian because it's just so easy for them. They're used to it. So that has become definitely a kind of a shift. I've heard a lot more. When I listen to people from Ukraine here in Seattle, you can spot it because they have a particular way of speaking Russian. There's a very particular accent. And what is amusing to me is how mixed it is. Some things I won't understand, like that's not a Russian word. And then I go, they actually speak this mixture of languages that sort of it is Russian, but it is also not Russian. And that's how I think people are negotiating the language that they were used to, but has now become to signify something very
Oppression.
negative. But close. So that's kind of background on me. But you were interested in specifically organizations here in Seattle. Is that?
Or just I'm interested in organizations like Russian-based organizations that are here in Seattle and the surrounding United States. So
Yeah, well, I can only tell you about the organization I'm part of.
yeah,
Everyone
that's
speaks Russian in it. Well, Uzbek and Russian, so it's been around for a very long time. I'm part of the Seattle-Toshkent Sister City Association.
mm,
It's a very old organization. It's 50 years old, very old. It was started in the time of Soviet Union during Cold War to try to bridge the cultural gap, to try to connect people. We just had our big meeting, incidentally, yesterday. It's
wow.
funny. And back in the, what is it, 70s when it started, it was trying to, prevent a nuclear war and make people connect. It was a huge organization spearheaded by the Americans and funded very well, and the government funded, and it included pen pal system. I was part of this pen pal system where I wrote letters in English with my pen pal in Seattle
Mhm.
while I was a student back in Soviet Union. And they came to Uzbekistan and to Tashkent, which is the capital, and they built this beautiful square, Seattle Square. And there were a lot of cultural exchanges, and people were traveling still. So the organization over the years kind of really held on. And it is an interesting organization because it is very much, it's everyone speaks Russian in it, but it is incredibly mixed. It has Uzbek people in it, Tajik people in it. It has Russians, it has Jews, it has Koreans. These are all the different people. Everyone speaks fluent Russian, which is their number one language. I mean, some people and they speak Uzbek as well, but a lot of people speak Russian. And this organization is now much smaller, I imagine, than it used to be. But the idea was to continue to try to hold on to the connection, to introduce people to a culture and it has very modest funding and really tries to exist thanks to donations from people. And I do think, though, ironically, I think it was after the war, it became even more, actually became more pronounced because it was moving. It's a fair paradox. We all speak Russian, like we were just there yesterday, we all speak Russian, but moving away from, dissociating from Russia and really kind of holding this tradition that is Uzbek, that is Russian outside of Russia. These diaspora people or all of us who grew up in our cultures that were welcomed, that coexisted. Now, they coexisted in this land that is Muslim land, but people, even after Russia was no longer oppressing, people speak Russian. There's still sort of a unifying idea. So this organization, I think, got a little bit even livelier because the war has pushed people obviously away. It was never connected to Russia in any way. So that's my experience of Russian speaking kind of community. I found my Russian speaking community among people who were connected to Russian culture, but not connected to Russia as a geography, as an empire, as a sphere of political influence. There's no one from Russia in it. So everyone speaks Russian. There's no one from Russia, and so it's an interesting dichotomy. I think sometimes the signifier that you can have a organization that carries a cultural significance of a language, and yet also represents a very different culture. So that's my kind of, I don't know I don't want to, digress from your topic. So if there is something sort of specific that is interesting to your thesis that I can answer, is there something?
I think that that is a very interesting point, and I find that the distance that's being created from the actual country of Russia and the Russian language and the Russian cultural experience is very interesting. So I would love if you would tell me more about how you have seen it separated and if since the start of the war, if it's like you said previously that it has actually increased the interest in the program, how have you seen more people coming and volunteering or like writing newsletters, as you had said before?
Well, I'll just say, just as a blanket statement, there has been a explosion of interest of people wanting to go and see this part of the world. I mean,
Mhm.
literally, when I used to say to people 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm from Uzbekistan, and people are like, huh? Huh? And now I say I'm from Uzbekistan, and people go, "Oh, I've read about it in, National Geographic or New York Times. I really want to go there."
I,
Really?
I
Like
would,
and I think partially it's because the country itself has put tons of money into tourism. They renovated these very exotic medieval locations and almost Disneyfied them. Sure, that's definitely. But partially because Russia is closed. Like no one in their right mind after the war. Sadly, I'm sad. I've only been to Russia very briefly, never been to St. Petersburg. I might never be able to go there. It's done. I don't know when we'll be able to go. So a lot of people who might have just even from the foreign interest, or me, who is a transplant, who would love to go back to Russia, it's closed, it's gone. And the danger of going to Russia, but the interest in the region or interest in that section of the world has shifted. And I think that a lot of people became interested in that part of the world. I mean, partially because it's become more easily accessible and the tourism, but also partially because the interest in Russia has spread. And it's not just Uzbekistan, Georgia, Azerbaijan. A lot of people, places that used to be satellite republics and where people still speak Russian, have become more interesting to people because Russia has become hostile. The other angle I see, so some of the people in our association are Americans who
Mhm.
studied Russian. Oh my gosh, I'm always amazed. Like the co-president, she studied Russian culture. She didn't study Uzbek culture and all through her life. Russian is really good. I'm like really impressed. She's I mean, she speaks with an accent, but it's an impossible language. But she's really, I mean, we're all talking in Russian and like really fast, and she's totally keeping up. I'm like, oh my gosh, Shoshana, like, I didn't say that, but I was very impressed. But sometimes it's hard to whether you want to compliment a person, like they've studied it for so many years. So a lot of people who had general interest in the region, who are not who are Americans, I think got pulled into these collateral cultures. I'm not sure. I don't mean to say that they're collateral to Russians, but they're cultures that continue to have close association with people who speak Russian, even though they are seemingly different. But because of this 70-year connection, they even, they continue to be linked. So did it increase? I think it increased, like people who maybe there's a Russian association. I'm not aware of it outside of like churches and everything, but potentially, but pulled people who were interested in Russian culture into this collateral way, being interested in a culture that is connected to those who speak Russian. And in this case, it's Uzbekistan. So I think there is greater level of curiosity. There's great level of just sheer travel because after the war it became unsafe, but also interest in the region that sort of shifted. Look, someone who is interested in speaking Russian, who was interested in that culture, can go to an Uzbek association and speak Russian
Yes, it's very,
completely. And you're like, what? Isn't Uzbekistan? It's a completely different language. It's a Turkic language. It sounds nothing like Russian. And I don't know it. Most people that don't know it, maybe 50-50, maybe 50% of people know it. But you go there and we're all speaking Russian. And so there is an element of cultural connection that is by language that got pulled closer because some of the other avenues, some of the cultural avenues are no longer available. Now, that said, there are several theaters in this Bellevue theater, Seattle. They're teeny tiny theaters that do keep up the Russian culture. I was just recently at the play called Uncle Vanya in
Mm.
this place 33. Do you know it? No?
Yes, I've
Yeah.
heard of it.
Wow, I have to tell you, I was very skeptical. A friend of mine said, let's go. I'm like, man. So you get there and it's like a strip mall and it's nothing. It's like a door to some tiny store. But it was actually a very interesting, thought-provoking, beautifully produced little play that's produced by this one woman. She's like, she does everything, the costumes, and the actors were great. It was a really fantastic production for people who are trying to keep alive the cultural connection without delving into the political one. So, and then someone else told me about another place, I forget the rest, some other studio, and I was surprised. And I don't know if this is a reaction to the war, but it's certainly trying to keep up the culture while while
From the political standpoint. Yeah.
yeah, removing it from that sort of political element, which is kind of question, in Russia, they can't do that. They persecute producers. I was just listening to a BBC special on a woman who's been imprisoned because she produced a play in which there were a bunch of women who went to marry ISIS more 10 years ago from Russia, and then later were expatriated back and were treated as criminals. And so the play is about both them being victims there and then kind of coming back and being victims in Russia. Well, they arrested this woman on the grounds of promulgating terrorism, which is, did you even watch the play? No. But these kind of horror, you can argue that the cultural cannot be separated. But here we are in the diaspora trying to sort of do that, separate out some of the cultural things out of the jingoistic, horrible stuff. And it makes it possible to love the language and the culture and not try to be apologetist for the horrible regime that is there. So yeah, so that's I don't know if it's increased, but it certainly brought a very diverse group of people together into at least into our little group here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And thank you so much for the information. And I know I would personally love to visit Uzbekistan.
Oh yeah, you should definitely think about it. I have to say, okay, so I'm from Uzbek, I'm from Tashkent, which is actually the least interesting of towns. It's a capital, but these towns, Samarkand, Bukhara, Hiva, it's pretty safe.
Mm.
And absolutely, that was the first time I went in the summer to Bukhara. My father's from Samarkand, so I've been to Samarkand. They got it, it's almost too pretty. It's sort of like they've renovated everything that was, everything was beautiful colors. You're like, I remember when it was just completely falling apart. Most of the stuff is new. But, it looks lovely and I do recommend because it is like nothing you've ever seen. It's total Aladdin.
Mm. That sounds lovely.
To
And
me, it was total Aladdin. And I'm from the region. I'm like, this has been here before. This is gorgeous. I learned so much about the history of the medievals. I was like, oh, it was Zoroastrian and there was Buddhism there briefly before the Muslims came. It was because, in Soviet times, we were just learning the Soviet history.
yes.
I was discovering everything was new to me too. Just because I'm from the region doesn't mean I knew. Anyways, but so yeah, high, like 5-star recommendation.
Yeah, I hope to get to visit one day.
For sure. Definitely put it on your list.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful to have been able to talk to you about this.
Of course.